Hi everyone, my name is Iben and welcome to another episode of The Road to Planet Zoo 2. In this episode we're going to talk about a more controversial feature in the game, which is the exhibit boxes. We all kinda have a love-hate relationship with it, so I think it's time to dive into what we can do to improve these in the sequel. But before we get started, it is very important to all get on the same page and to get some common misconceptions out of the way. One of the biggest misconceptions that were part of the first 2 years of development was that exhibit boxes were specifically made for smaller animals. This idea was so ingrained into the community that for a lot of people there was no other way that we were going to get animals like the meerkats without them being in an exhibit box. Luckily, that didn't end up being the case, but frankly, we could have already known that ahead of time. Because even though the developer journal does mention that they had smaller animals in mind for exhibit boxes, the real defining feature of an exhibit animal is the way it interacts with their environment. Specifically, these types of animals spend a lot of their time hiding out of sight, being camouflaged by their environment, and they do so by trying to stay still as much as possible. If we would have read this again when we were speculating about meerkats in the game, then we quickly would have come to the realization that, hey, yeah, this doesn't match the description of an exhibit box at all. They were probably going to be habitat animals. But more importantly, the fact that exhibit animals don't move a lot is an intentional choice. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the amount of movement and the complexity of the animations in a later segment in this video, but reading this developer journal does really make it clear that this was an intentional choice, and I think it might still be a choice that they will make for the sequel. A second very popular theory that has been dominating the game for quite a long while is the idea that walkthrough exhibits were specifically made to later introduce birds. Because with the introduction of the bats in the Twilight Pack, there were a whole bunch of people really convinced that this was a step-by-step introduction to birds. Every new feature that was introduced to the walkthrough exhibit was considered another step towards birds, and if we're honest, at the end of the development of Planet Zoo 1, this didn't end up being the case. And from a software development perspective, I do kind of understand that, because it would have been a very tedious way of introducing birds, and it would really have been a side road to what we wanted to achieve right away. In software development, you are more likely to just make a proof of concept and figure out all of these major features first, before turning it into something that you would then send to your players. But what could walkthrough exhibits have been for then? And once again, when we turn towards a developer journal, we see a little bit of information that might point us towards the direction that we need to go in. And that's the last paragraph of this section. They wanted to enhance the current experience of exhibits and wanted exhibit animals to feel more alive. So Frontier was aware that people weren't really using the exhibit animals that much and that they weren't really happy with how they were executed. And there's a lot of evidence pointing towards the fact that Frontier has a really good idea of what people are using in the game. This is one of the posts of the first anniversary, and it has a lot of cool, interesting analytical data. It goes as deep as saying that players in Thailand love to use the saltwater crocodiles. In Australia, people love the Nile monitors and obviously the red kangaroos. And it's a lot of very specific analytical data, and this data isn't collected to make these interesting anniversary posts, but instead it is made so that Frontier can know what works and what doesn't work. If you ever wondered why we got so many cats and dogs in this game, I think it's just very likely that their numbers showed that a lot of people loved these kinds of animals. And that probably means that they have a bunch of information pointing them towards the fact that the exhibit boxes were being underused. So my current theory is that walkthrough exhibits were most of all an attempt to make exhibit boxes more popular, and it does kind of make sense. Why would you keep releasing these animals when they're not popular? So at least trying to make them more popular could have been a way for Frontier to continue adding exhibit animals to further DLCs. And as we've seen so far, it ended up not being enough because the last 4 DLCs didn't end up getting a exhibit animal. Now, however, this doesn't mean to me that they will completely ditch exhibit animals in the future, but the reason why I'm including this part into the video is because this convinces me that Frontier will probably work on ways to make exhibit boxes better in the sequel than they were in the first game. And the next one is a little bit controversial, but there's this sentiment that Frontier can learn from Prehistoric Kingdom. Ever since the introduction of vivariums into Prehistoric Kingdom, I've seen that pop up quite a lot. Like the idea that Frontier should really look at how Prehistoric Kingdom has done their exhibits, and that they should take lessons from that, and that they should implement everything that Prehistoric Kingdom has implemented. Now, before I continue, this is an extremely important part of the video. I do think that the Prehistoric Kingdom development team is doing a wonderful job. They added a lot of really cool stuff into their games, and especially the foliage work is still something that blows me away every single time I see a screenshot of this game. Even now when I'm recording this video, I look at all the foliage here and it looks absolutely incredible. It's a little part of game development that I'm really interested in, so the fact that I'm talking about this really means how cool their foliage work is. So please keep in mind that whatever I'm saying right now is absolutely not a jab at the Prehistoric Kingdom team, not at all, not in the slightest. But I do think it's important to give credit where credit is due, because vivariums consist entirely of features introduced by Frontier first. One of the main things about the vivariums is that they have far longer and far more complex animation loops, and this is a really good thing because this makes them a lot more interesting to watch for players. But this was something that already existed in the exhibit animals from all the way since the aquatic pack with the terrapin, and was even dialed up to the max when they introduced bats. So this is something that Frontier already learned through their development process. Next up, the vivarium system uses transitional animations to make loops less noticeable. And they're doing an incredibly good job at that, because I've seen a lot of people call this a dynamic system, but this is still a looped animation system. So really, props to the development team of Prehistoric Kingdom, because this way of working really makes it so that looped animations really don't look like loops. And this is another example of something that Frontier had introduced first, and they did so by adding slots to the tropical pack. In the original system, you had animals moving from node 1, where they perform a animated loop, to node 2, whenever you're not looking at the exhibit box. With the slots, however, they actually have an animation that makes them move from node 1 to node 2, and I think that's really interesting and really improved how lively these animals looked. And just like the walkthrough exhibits, the vivariums in Prehistoric Kingdom can be turned null, and they improved on this by just making it possible to turn everything null. So that's what Prehistoric Kingdom did. They combined all of these features, and that gives great results. And they are not copying or stealing or whatever. If it works, it works. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Prehistoric Kingdom did a really good job at combining all these features with really great results. But again, as these were lessons learned by Frontier first, I think it's very likely that they will also apply them to their own exhibit boxes in the sequel. There's probably a whole bunch of reasons why they didn't retroactively add that to the existing exhibit boxes. Maybe one of the reasons is because they were just not popular enough, as we mentioned in the previous section. But I just think it's important to frame this as, hey, these were lessons that Frontier already learned. They don't need to learn it from Prehistoric Kingdom. I think it's very likely that they will apply these lessons to the next generation of exhibit boxes. Now that we know that it's pretty likely that Frontier is going to improve the exhibit boxes, it's time to look at what needs to be improved. One thing we can all agree upon is that while not all animals need to move more, at least some of them really do. One of the vivariums in Prehistoric Kingdom has a extinct snake species, and that really shows how much transitional animations make these look a lot more alive. I really like the fact that the snakes spend a lot of time curled up on the ground or in a tree or somewhere else, but I still really do want to see them move from one point to the other. that is a type of animal that I think really needs those transitional animations that were introduced with the slots in the tropical pack. I really hope this is one of those things that they'll add in the sequel, because without it, I think they will still not feel as alive as they should. But I can completely understand it if Frontier decides that for some of the exhibit animals, they're not going to apply these transitional animations. These kinds of games do need some form of optimizations, and for very small animals like arthropods, I am completely fine with them just being stuck to one spawn point, and whenever we move the camera and come back, we see them in a different spawn point. I'm fine with that. I don't need this applied to every single animal. Secondly, exhibit boxes need to become much more customizable. Because whilst I already like the fact that we have these toggleable enrichment items, I think this needs to be expanded much more. Essentially, I just want to be able to have full control over these exhibit boxes, so let me make everything null, let me just keep the terrain and then decide for myself which items need to be added and which items I don't want to see in an exhibit box. Finally, exhibit boxes need to come in more sizes. This is not a part of the video I'm going to spend too much time on. This is something that is universally agreed with. The 4x4x4 box is way too big for a lot of the animals that were part of the exhibit box setup, so please give us multiple sizes. Now that we know what we need to improve, we'll take a look at how we can improve these things. As I mentioned before, all elements should be toggleable. This is exactly the bane of my existence and the reason why I never used exhibit slots in my zoos. I really don't like the fact that you get this customizable thing, but at the end still end up having a big amount of pieces you can't get rid of, and that makes every exhibit basically look the same. Honestly, this is the main one for me. I need to be able to turn everything null with the exception of the terrain. Just make it so that we can completely customize everything. On top of that, I think we need at least 3 sizes of exhibit boxes. This is a very quick SketchUp. Please don't take the dimensions of this too seriously, but I would like to have a large exhibit box, a medium exhibit box, and a small exhibit box. And from a development perspective, I don't want them to waste time on making every animal fit in every type of exhibit box, so I'm fine with them being divided into these categories. The first category of small exhibit boxes for me are just for arthropods, and that allows you to make them just as small as they can be. Secondly, the medium-sized exhibit boxes, in my opinion, should be made for frogs and smaller lizards and snakes. And the large exhibit boxes can be left for animals like a boa constrictor or anything around that size. Now, in an ideal world, I would also love to see some different shapes, but I think I can be happy with just several sizes, because if you're able to turn things completely null, then you can make a lot of interesting shapes yourself. As you can see on the right, I made a rectangular shaped exhibit box with the null exhibit mod, and it looks like it's one exhibit. So whilst I don't need new shapes, I do kind of hope that we'll get a few different shapes as well. But as long as you're able to make things null, then I think you can already get far with the current exhibit shapes. And finally, some animals need to become habitat animals. The iguanas, for instance, are in that realm of a type of animal that could be both a habitat animal or an exhibit animal. And for me, I think it's better if you just make them a habitat animal. I don't think it makes sense to have an exhibit form and a habitat form for these animals. And if you can have caimans as habitat animals, then iguanas work as well. I have these as habitat animals because of a mod, and frankly, they work just fine. They work perfectly. So for me, give them as habitat animals, please. And that also applies to the flying foxes, the bats, and the butterflies for me, if they decide to introduce a Jurassic World evolution kind of aviary system. For me, if that is added into the game, then I sincerely hope that these animals will also be moved to that system. And that actually brings me to the walkthrough exhibits, and maybe one of the most controversial parts of this video. The thing about walkthrough exhibits is that they allowed us to have animals that we couldn't have before. Because if we take another look at the developer journal for the Tropical Pack, we can see that at least at one point they did consider making the sloths habitat animals, but as we can read here, there were problems with the need-based system and both the arboreal system, so they decided to go for the exhibit-based approach. So I do appreciate walkthrough exhibits for that. They did give us animals that we didn't get before, and they were able to circumvent the boundaries that the game had placed for them. But now that we have a new game, I think we have the chance to do it better, and we can drop exhibit boxes entirely. Again, controversial statement, but I am done with them. Because for me, even when being able to toggle everything, you still end up with these very large boxes, and that just kills creativity for me. I know that putting a creative person inside a box is a really good thing to do because it allows you to come up with creative solutions, but some boxes are really restricting, and for me the walkthrough exhibit boxes are just too restricting. For me, it is time to completely ditch them and just move on to better systems. I like them for what they were, and I really appreciate them for adding animals into the first game that we wouldn't have had otherwise, but it's time to move on. Thank you all so much for watching. Do everything you want to do, like, comment and subscribe, and in the comments let me know what you think about exhibit boxes, how you feel about them, and what things you would like to see changed in the sequel. Thank you so much, and see you in the next episode of The Road to Planet Zoo 2.